President Obama said in his inaugural address that we're going to restore science to its rightful place, and we're also going to transform our schools and universities to meet the demands of a new age. Meanwhile, there's a growing movement of student activists in America who are protesting the education system, saying it costs too much and isn't preparing them for life in the world they're going to live in. On the front lines of this struggle, the Students for a Democratic Society have been occupying buildings on University of California campuses in protest of America's education budget being spent on the war. Well, in my family, we've been reconnoitering the landscape ahead of the front lines for about 70 years. Way back in the 1880s, my great-great-grandfather Lord Dew was one of 5 assistant architects who helped design this before he immigrated to America. My grandfather was an airplane engineer in the early days of aviation, before there were computers. He helped design the B-17 and B-25 bombers to help drive these people out of France. My grandmother was a teacher and philosopher. She pioneered a humanistic philosophy just for the purposes of getting along with people. She discovered that everyone always does the best they can to try to provide for their needs according to their own interpretation of their best and their needs. By living her life around that simple observation about people, everyone who knew her was amazed by how easy she was to get along with. Then in 1953, she and my grandfather got bored with the LA suburbs and decided to move up to the Redwoods, which was their favorite place to vacation. My grandmother was a big fan of Henry David Thoreau, and to her, this was her own Walden Pond. My grandfather liked the Redwoods in his own way because, even though nobody at the time thought of it like this, evolution is the biggest engineering project in the world. If you go to the Redwoods, you'll see a whole lot of things pursuing goals very efficiently. Between them, my grandparents developed a philosophy and family culture of learning stuff so you can figure out how stuff works, so you can get along with people and the environment. In 1968, my dad was going to the University of California to be a mathematician. That was the year global environmental unsustainability was discovered mathematically, so he found out about it right away. The pioneers who discovered it realized that it was such a big and complicated problem that involved the interaction of so many things. Nobody in America was getting an education that they could use to solve the problem. To even begin to understand the entire problem, a person would have to learn how the entire realm of human knowledge fit together, and you would have to learn some things that hadn't even been discovered by that point. But when you major in something in college, you specialize in a field of study. Nowhere in America can you major in everything in the entire world. To solve that problem, a person would have to develop a philosophy of constantly learning how stuff worked so they could get along with other people and the environment. My dad realized that he already had a big head start at that, so he kept at it. So that's my educational background. Whenever a person starts talking about science, a lot of people always start asking about their academic credentials, so those are mine. To this day, it still isn't possible to major in everything in the entire world, which is why I don't have a degree in it, and neither does anyone else. But that doesn't prove it isn't possible for a person to learn. So my thinking I know a lot of stuff about science that they don't teach you in college isn't some sort of delusion on my part. That's just example number 1 of the failure of the education system. Example number 2 of the failure of the education system is even more exciting. You know what this is? This is a pilot's headset. After this happened, I volunteered for the War on Terror. I trained as a helicopter pilot for civilian emergency services because it was civilians who were being attacked. Well, there's a saying among gun owners: never point a gun at a person you don't intend to shoot. It's not just because of the danger of the gun going off. It's also because you're putting the other person into what they will perceive to be a life or death situation. Then they might act as if you're trying to kill them, and they'll try to kill you. And then you really will be in a life or death situation with a gun in your hand. The only way to establish peace through military superiority is to kill your enemies to the last man, woman, and child. Because unless you do that, there's still going to be someone in the world who perceives your actions to be placing them in mortal danger. That policy succeeded against some Native American nations, but there's an awful lot of Arabs in the world. I don't think anyone who volunteered for the military honestly believes we're going to kill all of them. On the contrary, on September 11th, what I could see that I could do in the situation I was in was to help defend the freedom of speech and freedom to an education, to buy enough time so the people who stayed home to get the education could figure out a long-term solution. And I'm sure most people who have volunteered for the military since then have done that too, even if they hadn't thought it through quite that far. The basic idea is that if individual people volunteer for the military, eventually America is going to win. And if it isn't going to happen because the people with the guns kill all the Arabs, it means someone is going to think of something else. For myself, that was the best I could think of because there's no college in America I can go to major in what I'm good at. So instead, I volunteered for the most physically and mentally challenging job I could think of. Likewise, everyone who volunteers for the military volunteers for whatever they think would suit them best, given the choices they can see. Well, we have a secular government in America. The Constitution, which I and everyone who volunteers for the military and law enforcement swears to risk everything to defend, is not some divine plan. It's a plan made by people that's supposed to be based on evidence about how people should act in order to achieve a goal, namely democracy. So I've just got one little question for all you smart people who stayed home and got the education. Why didn't you tell me that the Constitution was written before the theory of evolution and the laws of thermodynamics were discovered? You can look those 3 little facts up in an encyclopedia. U.S. Constitution written, 1787. Theory of evolution released to the public, 1859. Laws of thermodynamics discovered, 1868. That means the political system of the United States was founded by people who had fundamental misunderstandings about biology and physics. That means human behavior, the environment, and economics.